Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is John Frank, and welcome to the Microsoft Center for our evening debate on EU industry and a fast-changing global economy. We're very pleased to be sponsoring this event with your active and the endorsement of the Finnish presidency of the European Council. We're living in an incredibly exciting time for digital advances. Artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and machine learning are enabling tremendous new opportunities. But it's also, we're living in an incredibly unsettling period for global economic relationships, with the Trump administration's challenge to the multilateral rules-based trading system, the recognition of China's economic model posing systemic competition for Europe, and the imperative of dealing with sustainability and global climate change. The world today is you can say it's exciting, but you can also say there's challenges. And so for European industry, this is an incredibly important time. At Microsoft, our mission statement is to help every organization and person on the planet achieve more. And in Europe, our mission is to help European businesses succeed through the digitalization process. We're a leader in computational sciences and digital science, we published a book earlier this year called The Future Computing, AI, and Manufacturing. In it, we highlight the digital transformation of companies, including 7 in Europe. And very pleased that this evening we have with us Liam Bates, the Executive Vice President of Outokumpu, a Finland-based manufacturer of stainless steel, and who's featured in our book. We also have a wonderful group of experts that Brian will introduce from the Commission and Council. So please join me in welcoming Brian and our panelists to the stage.
Paul Teaser, Director of Basic Industries, Manufacturing and Agriculture, DG Competition, European Commission. Christian Vestager was in Parliament today as well. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Beside Paul, we have Lucia Studnicka.
Wonderful.
Excellent. 53rd time right. President of the Consultative Commission, Industrial Change, European Economic and Social Committee. Thank you for joining us. Beside Lucia is Jana Kankkonen, Chair of the EU High-Level Working Group on Competition and Growth, Director for EU and International Affairs at the Finnish Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment. Great to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
He's from Helsinki, or just outside Helsinki. And beside Jana, we have Liam Bates, who John mentioned just a moment ago. He's Executive Vice President of Supply Chain at Outokumpu, which is more or less correctly pronounced also. Thank you, Finland.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to speak just for about 60 seconds. Just tell us who they are, what they do, and their elevator pitch, their key message for this evening. Paul, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, key message. Thank you for inviting me. It's always nice to talk to DG Comp in the bigger picture, industrial policy, Europe's industrial future, etc., etc. The key message is, one, we have to complete the single market. The non-completion of the single market for goods and services is a major handicap. So we cannot compete with the United States, and we cannot compete with China if we don't complete the single market. Now, we also not going to get too far if we relax our competition rules, because a lot of people, a lot of good economists believe that you cannot have a modern industrial policy without strong, clear, transparent, independent competition law enforcement agency. The third point, and I hope I'm still within 60 seconds, I'm not good at this,
fine,
is that competition enforcement is not a silver bullet for all problems of society or the industries as a whole. We are good at what we are doing, creating a level playing field among firms. We are probably not as good as other agencies or other instruments, be it regulation or other enforcers, dealing with other policy areas. There is a temptation by politicians and stakeholders to go and grab this concrete, strong tool, competition enforcement, and use it for some other policy purposes. It's probably not a good choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia.
Thanks for inviting me, firstly. Nice to be here in this very honored company. I mean, we as a voice of organized civil society, actually, in our opinions, what comes out really clearly is that we need definitely holistic approach, actually to reconcile the growth with the climate, environmental, and especially social challenges, which are brought by the transformation actually going on today, where the technological changes pace is extremely fast, whereby the social dimension is slightly lagging behind, and we are still unable to tackle it in a comprehensive way.
Thank you, Lucia. Jana.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me as well. On behalf of the Finnish presidency, although not everything that I will say represents the views of the presidency officially, so that may be useful sort of disclaimer just at the start. Basically, what we have been working for during the presidency now is an idea about an integrated approach to sustainable growth. I think there are obviously a lot of policy areas that are instrumental and important for promoting conditions for growth for the next, say, 5 years. But there's no one single recipe, no one single answer to Europe's sort of challenges, but not also for its opportunities. So I think we need a kind of integrated, holistic view on our sort of policy approach towards sustainable growth. And I think the key word obviously is sustainability, which we have in the more general context also wanted to promote and want to promote in the context of the presidency.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Liam.
Okay. I guess I'm representing both industry and also specifically Nordic industry, being part of the Nordic stainless steel industry. And for us, there are sort of two specific areas where we can get a competitive edge in the next 10 years. And fast forward in 10 years' time, we believe that the whole of the supply chain will be talking about the sustainability of that product they're purchasing. And so we believe that there is a need to lead the world on sustainability. So that's one area where we're doing a good job on already, and we can develop further. The second area and the second tool is digitalisation for us. Digitalisation is a vast field, but for us it's very much about getting more of the data that is now available through machines, having greater processing power to make sense of all that data and then make it into specific information, improving our processes and thereby improving our competitiveness against other trading blocks. And in doing that, we are very lucky to have Microsoft as a partner on digitalisation.
Thank you, Liam. Let's do some horizon scanning to begin with. Paul, what really can the European Commission do, member states do, to strengthen Europe's economy for the future?
Besides those two major points, completing the single market and having an effective, strong competition enforcement independent left in place, I would say the state aid is a very good issue.
Good state aid or bad state aid?
Exactly, that's the excellent question. There is no such thing as all state aid is good or all state aid is bad. As you know, when we have a market failure, or we think we want to strengthen something like the R&D base, then state aid is the so-called good state aid. And our policy is very relaxed on that, rightfully so. So when member states want to fund R&D projects, education, retraining, then we're very lenient with state aid, I would say. What's the bad state aid? When walking zombies are kept alive for local political considerations, because
This reference to Boris Johnson.
there's no exit. And when there is exactly, not Brexit, when there is no exit of those companies who otherwise should exit. Why? It's not because we don't feel bad for the employees and for the company and the stakeholders or even the owners. It's because then their business does not go to a more viable, a more efficient firm, and that other firm cannot grow. because markets and their demands are relatively given. So if a zombie stays there, its business doesn't go to the better ones, and the better ones don't grow, they don't raise more finance, and you don't get a dynamic economy going.
Lucia, you agree with Paul on this, or in principle, or do you see the recipe for fixing inefficient markets in a different perspective?
Well, I mean, Paul has been mentioning actually the level playing field from the global scale as well. I mean, this is extremely important. But as I stated previously, we really need a holistic approach to things, and actually not that much attention, resources, focus has been given to the factor which is very important, which is actually labor force. I mean, we talk a lot about educational systems, training, retraining, lifelong learning, but actually we are still unable to coordinate at least a bit the initial education. Lifelong learning sounds lovely. We use it for more than 10 years already, but are actually educational systems able to learn the students that this is the concept, that we just start learning when we are small, and we end up actually when going to the grave. And there need to be a coordination by the different stakeholders. We need public administration actually to be participating. We need companies to be helping with focusing the qualification and skills which are needed. We need them for anticipation.
But isn't this being done already, or do we just need to move it up a gear?
Well, I don't have the impression that we are actually, that this is done, you know, on a level which would be satisfying, because all the time you can hear about the mismatch of qualifications and the business needs. Plus, I mean, the pace of adaptation of human being to the rapid changes we are actually experiencing now, that's a challenge of itself. So I mean, we need to find trust actually to accept the changes and to be able actually to change our lives in a way that we are not going to have a lifelong job anymore, that we are not going to be managing just with what we got with the initial education. Plus, there with the jobs which are highly probably going to be disappearing, some say about 20 to 50% of jobs by 2030.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. How prepared are we? What does the European Union need to do, and what do member states need to do? Because the European Union doesn't have autonomy with education system. It's with member states, but there's support. There's a support structure there for member states should they want it to some degree as well. What needs to be done that isn't being done right now?
Well, I'm not sure how well prepared we are and how well prepared we will be in the future. That's really the billion-euro question. Because I think also because of the fact that things are evolving all the time, day by day. What I mean by this is that we are basically undergoing profound changes in terms of technology development, in terms of the necessity to respond to the climate change, in terms of what we are facing as a sort of a global intensifying global competition, and this is an ongoing process, and obviously policymakers everywhere in Europe at national level as well as at European level are struggling to find the sort of right policy responses to these sort of rapidly evolving set of issues. So it's not an easy business.
Where do you think we're doing well? Where do you think we can say this has been done well? Let's try and replicate that in other areas.
I think what we've been doing well, and I think where we would want to preserve, and I think we would want to be quite careful about it, is indeed competition in the single market, and the kind of competition discipline that has been developed in the course of the decades in the EU. And I think there's a lot of rationale there, ongoing rationale. There's still a lot of rationale to actually keep that policy area not intact necessarily, because obviously also competition policy needs to evolve over time, and it needs to sort of respond to the obvious kind of developments in the society as a whole and the economy. But I think we have the good sort of framework there, which we would be well advised to sort of preserve.
Okay, Paul handled the Siemens Alstom case, so we're going to come back and talk a little bit about that in this context, to some degree at least. Liam, when we spoke on the phone and you said you're a steel manufacturer, I remarked how nice it was to actually have a European steel manufacturer after the economic crisis. I dealt a lot with the steel industry and it was almost wiped out.
Yeah.
You know, you survived and you're doing well.
Yeah.
Is this to do with member states? Is this to do with the European Union, or did you have a business model that adjusted quickly when others didn't?
I think we have a strong business model that allows us to grow. We're in slightly more of a niche market in stainless steel, and the ability to be able to produce extremely efficiently, and digitalisation is helping that, but also to produce the more special grades, even within the specialist stainless steel, has allowed us to survive and prosper. So at the moment, 35% of what we produce, the Chinese just don't produce, and that gives us a competitive advantage. Yet.
So how do you see in terms of preparing Europe's market, in your case the steel industry, is there stronger emphasis, would you demand more of the European Union or from your member state, from Finland?
We think the market is becoming increasingly global, so we would tend to look at it at least on a European basis. And what Paul said at the outset is very important to us, that we love free trade. We think if you've got a competitive advantage, you should be able to export that throughout the world. But free trade has to also be fair trade. So we have at the moment, for instance, we have CO2 taxes. We feel that we have the lowest CO2 footprint in the world in the Nordic steel. However, we pay the highest CO2 taxes.
Why?
Simply because I think the governments are responsive and responsible in Europe, and therefore the CO2 emissions are there is a cost associated with it, and that cost flows through either electricity prices or CO2 permits. And our issue is, you know, it sounds a little bit crass, but we only have one world, and therefore if we emit far less in Europe, that should be recognised rather than penalising the European producers and having imports which at times can have 7-8 times the carbon footprint coming in without any adjustment.
Do you see that this adjustment is going to be made where European manufacturers will be not so much protected but given a level playing field in this instance?
I certainly hope so, because I think it is becoming a greater debate. As mentioned, even though the consumers are talking about it at the moment, I think very much regulators are looking at the debate. So taking a shortcut by using a more polluting process, I think is being reacted to at all levels.
Paul, that's a fair comment though. Is Europe doing enough in this context to protect European manufacturers?
It's a little bit beyond my pay grade and my
I'm sure it's
expertise,
not.
which is certainly the pay grade. But no, I fully agree with the comments, because you have trade reciprocity issues here in a global playing field, and that's not a competition issue. The unfair level of playing field is not created by companies; it's created by maybe foreign subsidies, or, as you said, others can pollute more. Of course, then they can compete better. They enter into the EEA-wide market, where European producers come under stress. This is not a competition issue for us. Sometimes stakeholders would say, take into consideration in our analysis, it's extremely difficult to compare apples and oranges. I think the trade policymakers, legislators should live up to their difficult job and speak to create a level playing field in that sense as well. not just domestic competition. And of course, those can be very, very difficult conversations with our biggest trading partners.
Let's ask again, are you having difficult conversations with our biggest trading partners at the moment about how we rebalance this playing field?
I think we inevitably have, yes. And I think this discussion, I think well demonstrates the complexity of these types of issues that are cross-cutting and horizontal in nature. And I mean, one talks about sustainability as an overall objective, and you talk specifically about achieving climate neutrality by, say, 2050, as the Finnish presidency would like to propose. That will entail a lot of effort from different policy areas, and obviously one of the issues that one needs to look into is the way in which the European industry is treated vis-à-vis the global competition and the global players elsewhere or active elsewhere in the same sectors. So it's sort of inevitable that these issues will come to the fore in the next.
Lucia,
There are ways that we actually,
Sure.
or I've already seen it's externalized. You can almost see that everybody who buys a car, they look at the CO2 emission first because that's what it's been taxed upon in most places. So there is a way to externalize it. And I think once you've externalized, then and then just allowing everybody to see what the CO2 emission is and charge an equivalent tax throughout the world, then you can even increase the amount and reward better behavior and penalize worse behavior.
That requires a certain amount of trust globally. Would you trust some faraway markets to certify in the correct way? Is there an audit process that can be trusted by Europe?
You can't trust to 100%, but normally you get some good metallurgists. They can see the process and how the process pollutes.
Explain that a little bit.
Well, if we use an example, we in Outokumpu, for every ton of steel we produce, about 850 kilograms is recycled material. That's auditable. You can come up to Tornio and see the big scrap piles. You can look at our processes, you can see how much electricity we use, and therefore that is auditable. A producer in Indonesia who uses electricity and coal to reduce the nickel units, you can again see what the process is, and therefore you can approximate the consumption in order to verify the CO2.
And you could do this pretty much for every type of process to approximate the electricity consumption.
I would say plus minus 10%, I think you could, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That seems like a way forward, yeah?
Potentially, yes, but this of course concerns one sector only. So if you multiply this to cover the whole variety of different economic sectors in terms of trying to actually figure out the carbon footprint of each of the products that compete on the markets, I think it's already technically an extremely demanding task. So I think that's something for the future.
But do we say that's too hard, let's leave it out there, or do you see a way that we can tackle these other challenges in other sectors as well, at a European level and a national level?
I mean, again, personally, I think that if we take sustainability as a concept seriously, I think we need to get into that
so focus
sooner
there first
rather than later.
Okay. Lucia, just TTIP, for example, do you think we'd be in a better position when it comes to finding our way through trade wars if the social sector, the civil society had supported TTIP?
Well, for the moment, it's a very theoretical question, or rather, TTIP for the moment is on the hold, let's put it like that. I mean, the main issue has been actually really neglecting the social rights, workers' rights in the whole story. We just cannot today leave this aside and just focus on the business part of the story.
But do the social rights, they come at an economic cost as well, or is that a short-term cost with a long-term gain? How do you see it? Because we can we just add more money onto the price of something to pay workers, to pay for better social security, better healthcare, and we cripple our economies? Or do these things quantifiably produce a longer return and better return for the economy overall?
Well, definitely, we need to take this as an investment, you know, same investment as we do into technology. We need to invest into people. And there are some standards we just cannot go below, which are the ILO conventions and recommendations, you know, which should be absolute basis actually for that kind of issues. So, and I mean, it's also about taking the European social model seriously, because if we are just unable to go through it with the same seriousness in the FTAs, you know, then we are questioning actually our own values, which is hardly acceptable, you know.
Do values sell products?
Values?
Do values sell products? Do they re-export?
Well, values are not selling product, but we need the values actually to develop the European project, and we are still, you know, convinced that it's the best project.
Okay. Paul, then Jan.
Just as a citizen, values don't sell products,
So say humble citizen.
but values can avoid unrests
Yeah.
and can avoid more votes for far-right parties as a citizen. And I'm not a lefty one. No.
Jan,
As a humble civil servant.
excellent.
Yeah. I mean, there are standards. I mean, just the word standard. There are social standards, but also other standards. And I know, for instance, in relation to GDPR, of course, there are varying views about sort of usefulness and merits of GDPR. But I think the general mood has shifted quite a bit, and now I think there's, if not a consensus, there's quite a bit of agreement around the concept that this is indeed a European standard that can also at the same time develop into competitive advantage for the continent if we set a good standard and we can sort of work that through. And
That we
it can
compel
also
others to adopt that same standard.
Indeed, so it's a kind of a Europe acting as a global regulator, if you
Okay,
like.
thank you. Paul.
Sorry, as a citizen jumping in again. There's a trade-off here. If you want to maintain our social market economy value systems, some parts of our economy will be less competitive in the global market. Free global trade brings a lot of benefits. And then we get into increasing inequality or not on both sides of the pond. Who benefits primarily from free trade? And then, of course, if there is a company who's been around and 3,000 employees are affected, they say, I don't care whether overall our GDP increased a little bit because of free trade. I mean, so this is a trade-off, and if we want to keep both, then we better out-innovate our big trading partners. And by the way, the insight, what some MIT professors published a couple of weeks ago, that everybody gets it wrong what to do with China. Because there are all kinds of solutions. Trump, everybody got it wrong. We should simply need to out-innovate. Innovate better than our big trading partners.
What does it mean to innovate?
More
Because
R&D,
we use this
more
for
education,
okay.
and then you have a venture capital system, which the Americans have much better, to do the development as well, not just the basic
And then
R&D.
what?
Well, you have the most added value products rolling out in foreign markets, which today still Europe has a positive trade balance with the rest of the world. Not with China, but a positive trade balance with the US. Trump has another explanation, doesn't matter. But the rest of the world, a positive trade balance. Why? Because we make a good car, and that good car is sold, and you can trade other less valuable things for that, for your benefit. I mean, you have to be on the top of the food chain as to added value products. I mean, that's as simple as that. I mean, simple to say, but it goes back to what's going on in our schools, what's going on in apprenticeship. When somebody doesn't go to gymnasium and will study philosophy in Oxbridge, but learns how to deal with some machines, you know, that guy should do that and do incremental innovations every day better than the same guy in China or the same guy in Alabama. That's the recipe. Sorry, very good. A citizen.
Liam, then again.
From a heavy industrial point of view, I don't think there is too much innovation which is around invention. It's doing what you've always been doing better. And so even though we produce our special grades and we want to improve those, on our standard grades, which are still 65%, 2/3 of what we do, it's all about understanding the process that little bit better. And this is where digitalisation...
Incremental improvement.
Yeah. So digitalisation isn't putting a switch on and Industry 4.0 flows through your mill. It's looking at each process step and saying, well, how do we improve it? Now we've got 20 parameters that we can look at, and we can look at them in real time. In the olden days, you used to set your parameters, start your melting off. At the end came some steel out. If it was good quality, you could say, well, keep those parameters. If it was poor quality, you'd wonder what went wrong where. Now with digitalisation and you're extracting the data in real time, you can find out where the quality defects are. And if you can, I can assure you, if you can produce in Finland 100% quality, defect-free, you will always be competitive in
Yeah, but
One question.
Yeah,
from
go
me,
ahead.
and sorry, I don't want to capture. Tell us the price difference between commodity stainless steel and some of your high added value specialty ones where you are a world leader or, as you mentioned, your Chinese competitors cannot produce right now. Tell the price difference. Just that I happen to roughly know, but I think the audience should hear the price difference.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the roughly on the nickel price, but anything from 30% to 3 times the price.
3 times the price. The specialty steel or commodity steel. It's like mozzarella cheese versus commodity milk cheese. I mean, 3-4 times. Mozzarella farmers in Italy don't complain.
Yeah.
They don't complain. It's just the generic cheesemakers complain. I mean,
but you're in a mozzarella is not exactly a niche market, I think. Stainless steel and the specialized stainless steel that you produce is incredibly niche. The volumes that you produce are not going to be anywhere near the same volume scale that a Chinese company is producing for effectively dirty steel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a huge competitive advantage there, and in terms of market size.
Yes, there are economies of scale on the large production. However, if even there, because I don't want to stretch an analogy, but McDonald's can't sell too many of their Mac feasts if they don't sell 200 Big Macs or standard burgers, and so you need both. So you need cost competitiveness in the simple stuff. And then you need to show your innovation.
Okay,
on
so the innovate better analogy really only works at the top end of the market, doesn't it?
probably, although you can innovate on commodity markets, like the corn farmers in the United States. I don't know what they do or innovate, but they produce the corn cheaper than everybody else, and they put it on the world market.
Big machines.
Whatever, whether we like it or not, but in that particular sector, they're most cost effective.
Yeah, do you think that we should be focusing on the next big company? Because we always talk about the next big Microsoft, big Google company. Do champions matter? Do we need 3, 4, 5, 10 champions, or do we need 500, 5,000 strong, medium-sized companies that can deliver higher revenue, higher export value overall? Which would you prefer?
Good, smart combination of both, of course. You know, you need to have the leaders. We should be focusing and coordinating, actually having a strategy and trying to develop these third leaders. But for this, you need also the environment of small and medium-sized companies. If I'm not mistaken, we are having over 90% of SMEs actually in the company's structure in Europe. So definitely, this is one of our assets, and we should be really giving the best possible conditions.
So is the value in large champions that it produces an all ships rising approach? Microsoft, for example, works with thousands of smaller companies, and those companies benefit as a consequence. Google, the same. These large companies, they are the ambassadors for innovation, ambassadors for change in essence as well. Is that the real value? Jana?
I think it's not a question of either or. I think Europe is a big economic bloc, and it needs both types of all kinds of.
But do we focus too
enterprises.
much on big champions in the narrative of what a successful
I
economy
think the
looks like?
narrative is there clearly, and there's a sort of at least a political desire to develop more European leading companies. Of course, it wouldn't hurt if we had more European-born and European-based big corporations in the digital field. But I think that's a bit, it's a bit worn out.
Yeah, it's become
Issue in the
cliche.
sense that, I mean, we have the
Let me
this
bring
is
more,
a bit
something more tangible.
speciality, right?
Siemens Alstom, just to bring back to that kind of concept. What was I find this a really super interesting case because of the global perception of what a competition challenge is as well. Do we need big companies like that to compete on the global stage, or were they doing just fine as slightly smaller companies?
I mean, certainly there was a disagreement between what the two companies and their respective ministries or ministers in their home country thought, and what was the end of our analysis. As my commissioner and vice president designate, Ms. Vestager, said several times, we already had two European champions. Why do you turn it into one European champion? Because we had two. And in fact, the facts behind that fact was that Siemens and Alstom sold the most fast trains and other trains on the world markets more than anybody else. They are world leaders. Now, they showed us a balance sheet of a Chinese train company, which involved all Chinese train makers, track makers, and it was this tall, and they showed their would-be balance sheet size post-merger, which was half of that. They said, look, we still half of our balance sheet, so we should merge. I'm a lawyer. I was scratching my head. What did I miss in Econ 101? That the size of the balance sheet determines how competitive, how efficient, and how good you are. In that case, in my previous life, I grew up beyond the Iron Curtain. Maybe today the Soviet Union would be a champion because they had only one company in everything with the biggest balance sheet. But I didn't say anything. I just get on with my job. We did the analysis. And the Chinese never sold a fast train outside of China. Never. Never. Not to mention on signaling, which was an issue. But the main point, and that I think even a couple of hours ago, my commissioner said that in the parliament, the hearing, we always give an opportunity for merging companies to provide adequate remedies, which would likely restore competition, and then we let them merge. I think in the last 3,000 notifications, we prohibited 7 or something like that. So the statistics, the intervention is very, very low. And on a yearly basis, we have about 300 notifications. We have 10, 15 remedy cases where the companies offer remedies and they avoid a prohibition. And then again, 1 or 2 prohibitions every 2 years where we cannot come to terms what are the right remedies, or they offer no remedies. And unfortunately, in Siemens Alstom, we repeatedly invited them to give a proper remedy, which would restore the lost competition which the merger would bring about. Because I think there was no question about significant loss of competition, particularly in signaling, but also in the very fast trains over 180 kilometers speed or more. The choice would have been tremendously reduced. We had dozens of member states where either one company was present and the other was sometimes bidding for that, or the two of them were present. So potential competition, actual competition would have been eliminated in 20-some member states on road trails signaling. That's a serious problem. Everybody complained. Prices would have gone up in Europe for a considerable period of time. And that had to be weighed against the argument that maybe one day, soon or not soon, 5 years, 10 years, the Chinese will be here selling fast trains or doing signaling. Now, signaling, which is sensitive for security reasons and other reasons, getting the license and going into the embedded signaling system of member states, that's really a long shot to be there as an imminent threat. So we maintained our competition concerns and we asked them to provide remedies so somebody can step up with similar force to have downward pressure and pressure for them to continue to innovate. Because if you don't have that competitive pressure from your competitors, you get relaxed. You are a little bit lazy.
Okay, Jana, do you see a greater challenge for the preservation of something of a pure competition policy when you're dealing with less rational actors on the global market? United States, with a president who doesn't think in these terms. How do you preserve a level playing field, a rational competition policy in the face of populist economics?
Rational. Well, I have my confidence that the U.S. policymakers will, by and large, continue to be rational also in the future, and very important partners for the European Union, for that matter. I think, as said in the beginning, I think the competition rules, EU competition rules, have generally served us well, and I at the same time understand the sort of, when discussing about the need to create European champions, it's kind of in the face of global competition. I understand the objective, and I think it's well warranted. But I think the in particular, if reference is made to the merger control rules, I think as Paul mentioned, I think there's a very tiny fraction of the cases that have experienced real difficulties in the kind of DG competition machinery. So I think the kind of need for consolidation, and I think that certainly can exist in Europe, and I think at the same time it's important to kind of understand that it's not the competition rules that stand in way of consolidation, at least to a large extent. Okay. So the other thing is then about digital business and digital solutions. So I think we also need to make sure in Europe that we have a good degree of competition in digital solutions, in provision of digital services. So in that sense, I would say that competition rules and the enforcement of those should more be stepped up rather than the other way around.
Any particular actors you have in mind?
Well, I mean, we have seen sort of stepped up activity vis-a-vis some of the big platform companies, and more recently we have the present and the likely future Commissioner for Competition that has proposed interim measures in respect of a particular.
Do you see these big cases, Google in particular, Apple not to be ignored, that a lot of the pressure in terms of competition is attached to taxation as well? And that if they were paying taxes in European member states at a rate which people find acceptable, perhaps some of the deeper scrutiny on the competition side would not be there?
Well, again, it's a complex.
Because we're going to have an executive vice president and competition commissioner who could probably straddle both sentiments in her next role.
Sure, I think taxation obviously is a massive issue, and again, I think there needs to be a kind of a proper response that can be found to that. I think the OECD is working on the digital tax issue, and I understood that actually they would come up with a proposal soon to be published as a kind of a proposal for a way forward. So we'll see what that brings about.
Okay. Liam, the assumption is always European companies need the single market. How dependent are you on the single market as an exporter?
Not totally dependent. However, it is a lot easier to do business in the single market. we're UK, Sweden, and Finland based, and we see Europe as being our domestic market. It's easier with the standards. It's easier with closer partnerships for the innovation.
If you were to ask the Commission to focus on single market, deeper single market, or a more robust competition policy, which would you choose first?
I'd probably take the single market. Although if I was allowed to add the environmental level playing field, I'd probably put that first.
Okay, Jan?
I would put a lot of emphasis on improving the single market,
Okay.
because that is an asset, but I think we can actually do a lot to improve the functioning of that. We have the competition discipline, and I think
Okay.
that's more established, but we've got a lot of things to do on the single market.
Okay.
Enforcement, services, all those things, and I think they really need to be taken seriously
Okay.
by the new Commission.
Lucia, and then Paul, and I'm going to go to the audience some questions. Lucia, where would you pitch the focus? Competition or single market first?
Well, both are important, actually. I mean, in a sense, if we are going to be able to manage with really keeping the level playing field in the social sphere and in the climatic actually standards, then definitely it's clear, you know.
But
we need a good
a level
balance.
playing field on climate is wishful thinking if we don't have strong competition policy, though, isn't it?
Well, in a sense, you are correct, but I mean, you know, if we really want to move forward, we need to fight for this. You know, otherwise, it's really we are just sending the jobs, you know, outside Europe, and that's nothing anybody would actually wish for.
I actually don't see any real link between competition policy and climate policy. I think they're two different areas.
Okay.
One's more trade policy, one's more internal competition.
Okay, Paul, and then with the audience. Sure.
One quick thing on the theoretical question: if Nokia and Ericsson were to merge, I don't know the facts, and so absolutely, I cannot comment whether we would object to it or not.
Because it's a theoretical
Yeah,
exercise.
yeah, exactly. But I would like to promote competition policy, that we are not ayatollahs, because we have rules that even if, let's say, a merger were to be outright opposed, joint R&D by companies are allowed under our competition rules. So this is very important takeaway. So for example, if Siemens, Alstom were to come together and said, your brakes are super, our coaches are better, let's do it together, some R&D to make a super fast bullet, they wouldn't object to that. That's a totally different thing when you completely merge, you make the super thing, and then you provide one price. Or you don't even make anything super thing, you just continue to promote your two different products at a coordinated price because it's under one roof. So I just wanted to point out that we are not always in an Ayatollah way to object to cooperation. In fact, we have detailed rules on joint R&D. There's horizontal guidelines on joint cooperation in R&D. You Google this, you find our rules, which tells the companies how to finesse and improve their stuff without getting in trouble with us. I just wanted a little
I want your
propaganda.
next policy paper to be, and I dare you to do this, to call it Ayatollahs and the Super Thing, okay? It'll be covered. Questions from our audience, please. Do we have microphones handy? Yeah. Okay, just tell us who you are, where you're from. Gentleman here first, and then there. Who you are, where you're from, and then short question, if you will, please. No lobby statements. Thank you. Can we, is this on?
Secretary General of SEMA, which is the Ag Machinery Association,
Okay.
manufacturers of agricultural machinery in Europe. Just a couple of numbers so that you understand where my question is going to take.
Try this microphone a little better, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So our industry, ag machinery, has about a turnover about 40 billion euros every year, while the apparent market in Europe is 26 billion euros. So that's the production minus exports plus imports. We have the cleanest tractors in the world because our engine emissions are unmatched by the rest of the planet. and we have the slowest uptake of some of those technologies. You talked about this big tractor somewhere in the US that must be doing something differently. So I'm pointing to something I missed in this debate, because we're talking competition rules, we're talking industry champions and all that, but what are we doing for the uptake of those new technologies? Can we be more flexible on the rules? Is there a way that we can actually support, enable, facilitate, fill in the blanks? What can we do to facilitate this uptake? Because all those new precision farming technologies, things that are actually developed here and that we're trying to export to the rest of the world, maybe we should start at home in facilitating those.
Okay.
Most of the investment
I'm
today
going to
is
put
in
this to the
Asia.
panel. Before the panel answer the question, what do you think should be done to increase the uptake?
Facilitate the uptake.
How?
Modernize CAP policy, facilitate some of the greening that can be done at the national state, but you very quickly get into the sphere that you have more support here than there, and then it's an issue.
Okay, thank you. Panel, who wants to take that first? Jana. Paul, while Jana has the
Maybe
thing.
someone else can.
Yeah,
kick
I
off.
can start. Just last week, I had a chat on the margins of a meeting with a big car maker's CEO, and he said, "Look, everybody wants to push electric cars, but people are buying SUVs in Europe. You know, so when it comes down to your family decision, more people, maybe not this audience, but across Europe, people buy more SVUs than EVs, electric cars. So what should I do?" And as a lawyer, I'm in a very lovely position because I never passed Econ 101. What I remember that I was told, if you don't like something, tax it, and if you like something, give them breaks. So some countries do that, and a little bit in the bigger engine, you disproportionately pay higher taxes, not disproportionately. So for cleaner tractors, you simply just, if somebody buys a tractor which pollutes more, a pollution tax on it. That's it, and maybe even subsidize a clean one. That's going to be with the electric cars. There's not enough chargers if you take a trip and so forth. I'm sorry. So you have to continue to help it. You're absolutely right, but that's where policymakers, you tax what you don't like, and you help what
But it's
you like.
happened in Luxembourg
and
with electric
consumers
cars.
cost-
And
No?
the electric cars,
I don't
they give the tax subsidy for electric cars, and sales went up, uptake increased. They reduced the tax rate, and the decline started almost immediately as well.
You have to keep up the subsidy. This is how you change human behaviors, and businesses factor in these as a cost. Now, you also you brought up CAP policy, that why smaller farms don't form big cooperatives in certain member states. I'm also responsible for agriculture. This is an endless dispute that somehow you draw this line where people drink beers north and they are Protestant and they form giant cooperatives. You go to the south where they drink wine and they like small farms. And I don't know why it is, but you just cannot tell the farmers form a giant cooperative and be more efficient. You look at north, whether the Dutch or the Danes, it's a giant cooperative. I don't know why farmers are so different. No, maybe somebody knows.
Thank you. Anybody else want to take this question on uptick, or we take another question?
No, but I think it is the same. Like it's a carrot and a stick. The taxation is a stick, but you could almost argue if you had the subsidies there in order to promote the cleaner technology, then that would actually help.
Thank you. Question here, gentlemen.
Yes, thank you. My name is Mihai Vașcu, and I'm a member of the European Economic and Social Committee, and I work with the Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Romania. I have two questions. We've heard a lot about challenges, opportunities, advanced technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics, and everything else, and new business models, and of course, game-changing, and the fact that we need to adapt. But do you need that we need a clear strategy for the European industry on short, medium, and long term? And do you feel that sometimes the member states are not moving in the right direction? Maybe this is more for Paul. And that without a common effort, we will not succeed on this. And my second question is, if you would have to name one competitive advantage or the most important competitive advantage that the European Union has today, which one would that be? Thank you.
I'm going to answer that. Rule of law. Paul.
Yeah, I think the second question is the way of life. I mean, a lot of professionals who 10, 20 years ago would have emigrated to the United States may stay in Europe, at least on the richer member states, because of the social structure. Income inequality was always present on both sides of the Atlantic, but I think the squeeze on middle class in the Anglo-Saxon world is bigger than in Europe, and the pinch not having healthcare is there. If you ask people in the US why you have less entrepreneurship compared to before, one of the main reasons they cite, I cannot give up my employer-provided healthcare. I can gamble with my savings, I can gamble with my house. What I cannot gamble with, that I start my own business and I don't have proper healthcare for the whole provider. It's just I've heard a very reputable economist citing that. So I think the European way of life is something which we can be proud of, and we have something to attract people compared to Chinese, and maybe some pari passu with our American friends. On comprehensive industrial policy, I think the recipe, if you do a lot of Wikipedia and some other research, you always find out it's human factor, it's human capital, it's R&D, it's R&D. In the last 30 years, Europe spent way much less on R&D than the United States, less than Japan, and still we spend more than China, but China is spending more and more and more. The number of PhD students they produce and they educate overseas is way more than what we do, and this is the long-term well-being. I mean, human capital with those added values, what I mentioned, that you're always on the edge with the most innovative products. You know, natural resources doesn't help. You look around the world, countries, look at Russia. I mean, you know, but long-term, historically, very rich, but for other reasons, they don't get their acts together that they bring out. So for an industrial policy, it's very simple. Thank you for saying that don't muck with competition policy, because you need a level playing field that makes everybody ambitious, and they know that favors from this government or that government may not pays off that well, than in a crony capitalism, the other extreme. And then it comes back to foster innovation and spend more public money and private money on R&D, and somehow get the American VC venture capital guys coming here, because you see early stage patenting and R&D done here, and then you don't have the development, the mechanism and the risk taking. That's in biotech. In the last 20, 30 years, 80% of innovation in pharmaceuticals and medical devices come from the United States. Why? You know, you look at those guys who were the original scientists, every other of them have an accent. They came from somewhere. Why? Because there's a mechanism there to roll out and bank on it, the VC system. So we don't have the money, or those who have money in Europe are very conservative, and they would bank on granted state monopoly, like an autostrada or something, where you just collect the money. You know, I'm making an extreme point. So somehow we have to figure out. So the solutions are relatively simple, but it's just extremely difficult and painful to implement.
Yeah, we'll come to Liam in just a second, and just the one point to pick up on, maybe Lucia wants to elaborate a little. This idea that entrepreneurship fails because people are afraid to lose their healthcare, and you're talking about rebalancing the social economy for the future as well. Do you see that if Europe invests in social welfare, that it could encourage entrepreneurship because the risk-taking element is diminished as well? Do we need to reorganize our economy in such a way that you shouldn't feel afraid of your social protection for the future? Will this help entrepreneurship?
Well, I mean, definitely it would be favorable to go into more coordination in the social security, but I mean, it's not that much the point, because European social model, although very different in different parts of Europe, is functioning somehow. So it's protective, but it's rather about really embarrassing to fail in the entrepreneurship in Europe, which is so different from the US, where it is normal that you just try 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and for the 7th time you are successful, and that's what counts.
So this cultural
So
mindset.
it's actually a cultural thing, but I
Okay.
mean, just wanted to make one point on. Fully agree what Paul has been saying about the way of life in Europe, but I mean also the social model should be completed, as we love to talk about the single market to be completed, because the differences in the different member states are enormous. So if you look to a country with hourly income being 10 times less than more or most developed countries, there's something we should be working on, because that's a potential of problems for the future.
Okay, thank you, Lim.
Just to address your first point as well, you're right. We've been talking about automation. We've been talking about all aspects of digitalisation. So one no-brainer for policy, I think, is making sure we have enough qualified data engineers, automation engineers. It would be heresy, so good job there's nobody else in the steel industry here. But why do we train so many mechanical engineers, metallurgists, when in actual fact the industry now is more about understanding the data and programming the systems? And so we need a balance. You need some metallurgists, but we need a balance and have more of this, and also retraining. As you rightly point out, if somebody is told to do something for 25 years solid, you then need to retrain them to do it slightly differently.
In terms of retraining, are we missing the point when we talk about retraining? Is this something which needs to be absolutely invested from early years in school, where coding and data is integral to the education curriculum?
I don't think so. I think you have the geniuses that program the systems, but for us, we have 10,000 employees. 8,000 are in pulpits. We're training them not to go out and actually physically touch the steel. It's dangerous for a start, but more to be able to understand how to change the system within, change the process within the pulpits, looking at the data. So I think it is retraining on the job now, as to you're no longer outside and getting oily. You're inside, changing the
So
parameters.
lifelong learning. Jan?
Maybe just to pick up a few points. I mean, on the entrepreneurship, I think it's a long-standing issue and sort of a conversation in Europe, whether and to what extent Europe is different and why. For instance, from the US in terms of risk-taking, yes, I think it's a cultural issue, but I think there can be policy mechanisms that sort of underpin this culture as well. For instance, bankruptcy laws that exist may not be designed in a way that could kind of allow a fresh start.
And there's a huge discrepancy in terms of terms across, for example, the UK, I think it's 1 year for bankruptcy law. In the Republic of Ireland, which is just across the border, which is fairly topical as well. I think it's something like 10 years, something like that. Yeah, how can you have a level playing field in terms of innovation policy, competition, entrepreneurship, when you have such widespread discrepancies? And then that's even within Europe, not even talking about America.
Absolutely, that's a good question. About industrial strategy, yes, I think we would probably benefit in Europe from creating a bit more direction for sort of an industrial future. I don't think that we need prescribed solutions as such from the part of public policymakers, but I think direction, for instance, towards sustainability, sort of directional for transformation. I think at the EU level there's a lot that can be done. But I think one of the key issues, and I think we probably haven't mentioned this, we have mentioned the single market, but I think it's really the scaling up that is one of the key sort of concerns, and it also would be a key asset if we would have a better functioning single market. That would sort of sort of genuinely enable swift scaling up of European-based businesses, because that's really what the single market should essentially be all about. And you would have sort of the same set of rules that would allow you to scale up instantly in your big domestic sort of home market, rather than in these isolated pockets.
Do you see a shift in mentality with that? Do people realize that, have we reached a level of maturity within the single market that it's obvious what needs to be done, or are we still so parochial in our mentality that there are too many lines to be joined?
I think there's an increased realization of the need to step up efforts in this. But I think it's probably because of the history of the single market as well. I think the whole concept was created for trading goods. And now we have a completely different economy in front of us. Fastly evolving digital services integrated with manufacturing and all that. And that, I think, would need a kind of a fresh approach to improving the sort of a real functioning of the single market.
I told it was the super thing and the new single market. Okay. Any other questions? Please tell us who you are, where you're from, please.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Riccardo, and I'm from the European Association of Construction Equipment Manufacturers. So I will have to echo what my friend Jerome, of our friends from the tractors manufacturers, have mentioned. On the other hand, I would like to also offer a lead. And for us, there is a very simple pull factor for the uptake of digital machines, clean machines, and it's a tool of public procurement. And it's not being used. Public authorities keep pushing out tenders at the lowest price instead of using the element of public tender for an improvement project or the use of intelligent machines, the use of clean machines. There are some niche initiatives, of course, once again, in the Scandinavian countries, which are getting started, but that's not yet there. And that's a very low-hanging fruit, because the European public procurement directives already give that availability. So it's not even about subsidizing, it's actually a better value for money. So it's better spending of taxpayers' money. So
yes, but that's over the longer term, isn't it? So how do you convince public authorities to change the tender process and not focus on the initial cost, but to focus on lifetime cost?
Well, it's not really a long-term process. It's really about shifting the mentality from cost to investment. But once again, the directives have already given that availability and that ability. We know there is a question of skills also in the procurement authorities. I'm always told that training procurement officers is a key challenge for procurement authorities, and all of them are not all of them are very large statewide procurement authorities. We're talking about cities, we're talking about local governments, provinces and departments. But this is really one of the pull factors that in an industrial policy, in an industrial strategy, we should look like. There's another element I would like to ask the panel to possibly think about, and it's the weight of regulation. And when I look at competitiveness, for me there is another word afterward, and it's competitiveness proofing of legislation, or competitiveness checking of legislation. And that's something where we as European Union, we have set some milestones, but we don't always do our homework. And today there was a very big coalition of stakeholders asking for the withdrawal of the e-privacy regulation, and that would put a dent into productivity and competitiveness of European industry compared to our global competitors. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Panel, who wants to comment? Jana.
Well, I think it's an excellent point about public procurement rules and their application. And as far as I know, I think it's exactly a question of sort of shifting mentality from cost to other considerations as well, which might include investment but also innovation. I mean, we talk a little bit about innovative public procurement, and that would be certainly one way to step up activities in this regard.
Thank you. We're coming to the end of our time, so I'm going to ask our panel to sum up in just a few moments. I'll take one more question. Paul.
Oh, on just rulemaking, impact assessment, public consultation, impact assessment. The Commission introduced that a good 5 years ago or a little bit more. Some of them are very well done, some of them a little bit rushed. In some legislation, the European Parliament decided not to have an impact assessment, and they pushed something through. So you have to keep lobbying that you need public impact assessment and listen to everybody. On public procurement officers, I don't think the public procurement officers decide on the final terms, price versus beauty contest. It's the mayor, it's the elected officials, or it's the head of a division in a ministry, and for some reason, when it comes price, taking over, assuming that it's a fair competition and there are no other angles coming in. Again, it comes back to that point, you tax, you levy something which you don't like, and that's going to change the price. And you don't need to subsidy, but you just put a bigger tax on a machine or anything which pollutes more. And if it's not enough, local laws should increase the penalty, because incentives will have to change in everyday businesses.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. If the decision maker is only there for a 5-year period because they're a mayor,
Absolutely.
then what is going to be their investment horizon?
Absolutely. I can cite examples, hospitals buying an MRI machine, long-term lifetime cost, their budget, not authorized. They have an annual budget from a ministry, so they do a tender and they are literally forced to buy the cheapest machine, even though in a 5-year term for maintenance, whatever, they pay more than for the other machine.
There must be solutions to that.
Yeah, to change elected officials, we should all get involved in more.
Well, that's not working out so well right now.
Actually, you need competence actually, and a long-term vision, which is not always there actually, because I mean the experience with tenders on really focusing on just only on price, makes us crazy. But I mean the shift of mentality is not like switch on, switch off button. So that's it. We just have to work on that and really move the understanding towards what is sustainable and where we are not rich enough to be able to buy cheap things.
Okay, thank you. Any final questions? You have the last question, sir. Tell us who you are, where you're from, please.
Yeah, I'll probably be able to shout if it's okay.
I can hear you.
Bruce from BACA. We are an industry association, Secretary General for Adhesives and Sealants Association. We are actually extremely active on circular economy, and this is one area that frankly Europe is by far leading the world. And actually we within our membership are trying to encourage innovation, to come up with new ideas, new concepts, new adhesives, to encourage easier recycle, as well as extending the life of a product that is produced with our materials. I heard that on sustainability earlier on, a little bit on sustainability in the discussion. I really am surprised I haven't heard as much excitement and enthusiasm for the new industries that Europe can champion in circular economy.
Such as?
So I'd like, well, I think in terms of new paper, cleaning facilities, we get a lot of Chinese paper coming in, which contaminates the recycle of our paper. So how do we actually improve this? Can we invest in new recycling technologies, new adhesive technologies to actually cope with this, ones that can be washed out rather than the cheaper one, which comes back to an issue that actually is more difficult to wash out today. So I think, with the right intention and initiatives and so on, there's real opportunities for Europe. I would love to hear just a view from the group on the circular economy.
Panel. Liam.
Well, as the leading recycler in the metals industry, I agree with you totally, and we need to ensure that we get all of the, first of all, along the lifetime, and secondly, that we are able to reward higher recyclability. The one thing that often surprises me, as I say, fast forward in 10 years, I'm hoping we fast forward in 5 years, but it is still only a debate at the consumer level, rather than we would like to see your recycling credentials and then base our business decision on that. So the question is there any is it legislation, or is it just education of
Or is this non-tariff barriers? Is this a case of non-tariff barriers to protect the European economy while this adjustment is made?
Yeah, it's not so much non-tariff barriers as mentioned. It's just border adjustments. Just saying, if you have a high degree of recyclability, we'll give you benefit for that. If you don't, if you use a lot of CO2, irrespective of where you've produced, you will pay for that CO2 at the same tariff as Europe.
Okay.
That would be enough.
Thank you, Lynn. Jana?
I think about recycling, about circular economy, very important. I think at the end of the day, what we are talking about and we should be talking about is moving towards zero carbon economy, and how is it that we in actual fact can accomplish this in various economic sectors. And it's a massive effort, and it entails a lot of investment, it entails a lot of regulatory choices in the future, but I think that's the direction we need to go. I think the Commission has done quite a bit of work on that already, and I think that sort of relates to this industrial policy theme very closely on the so-called strategic value chains approach, and I think that's something that needs to be probably stepped up in the European context, but also obviously nationally when thinking about this big transformation.
Thank you. Any quick comments from Lucia, Paul, on this subject?
Just a very short comment. I mean, this could be a real opportunity for genuinely European approach, and we should be actually focusing on that. And it's a lot about motivation, education, but it should be the way, definitely.
I fully agree. Europe can distinguish itself in the world on the long run, that we are at the cutting edge on these issues. However, as I mentioned, the SUV electric vehicle example, businesses have to look at the bottom line. They have customers, even if they are business customers, I always like to say the example, we all would like that people eat free-range bio chicken, but if you live in Brussels, a kilo is 25 euros. And if you drive the tram at home, the tram driver makes net, I don't know, 1,500 euros. And if the guy has 2-3 teenagers and want to have fried chicken, is he going to buy the free-range chicken because it's better for the environment and better for the health? No, he's going to buy the frozen chicken, which came from Brazil in a big block, and I don't know, $2.99 a kilo chicken breast or something like that. So you have to have the economics work with incentives, taxing the bad thing and helping the good one, that people's, consumers' behavior changes on economic basis, not just wishful thinking, but really the economics have to be there throughout the chain.
Paul, that was excellent. You hit it to 1 second to the end of our
I wanted
time
to
running
comment
out.
on that.
You can go ahead.
Because I think on the EV electric vehicles market, I think it's also a question of supply. It's not only a question of demand. European industry has not been, let's say, aggressively quick in terms of actually putting onto the market EVs. In the Netherlands, in the last, I think, quarter this year, Tesla 3 was the most sold car. That just gives you an idea that if there is supply, there's also...
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I'm not here to defend industry. I'm here to enforce competition rules
on
the
example.
industry. But
Just
I would
an
like
example.
to make a point. A Tesla car and a comparable diesel Mercedes, which is a very nice car, the Tesla cost an extra 15,000, 20,000 euros more than the Mercedes. And the Mercedes will run the diesel engine for 12 years without touching it. I'm owning a 13-year-old diesel car. I don't know whether the Tesla is going to run. So consumers, they have their own, maybe wrong choices, which education can influence a little bit. But ultimately, you have to ban diesel. You have to tell Paul, next year your diesel tax gonna go through the roof, and I'm gonna go to an EV. So and the poor car makers, they look, okay, I make these cars, I'm not gonna sell it.
It's not a question of tax. I mean, it's not a question of tax at all.
And then you need to have the purchasing power to be able to buy the car.
I mean, I don't disagree with you, but businesses look and they spend a lot of time what will be their demand, because if they get it wrong, they're gonna get out of business. So it really, the economic incentives have to be there that throughout the chain people buy the bio-free-range chicken, and hopefully at that time the price will go down from 20 euros to 5.
But that's actually.
Okay. Competition politics is a game of chicken. Thank you. I'm not going to ask you to wrap up. You've done extremely well. I enjoyed this conversation a lot today. Let's thank our panelists tonight.